Welcome to Killer Women with your host, best-selling author Danielle Girard. And now, Danielle's next killer woman.
Hello, and welcome to Killer Women Podcast, a proud member of the Authors on the Air global network with more than 4 million listeners. I am your host, suspense author Danielle Girard, and my guest today is Cate Quinn. Cate was a travel journalist for The Guardian and Times before becoming a novelist. Her novels have sold more than 500,000 copies worldwide. She also publishes under the name CS Quinn, and she's here to talk about her latest book, The Clinic. Welcome, Cate.
Thank you so much for having me.
So fun. Okay, I gobbled this book up. Tell our listeners about the Clinic.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so much. I'm glad you enjoyed it. So The Clinic is a murder mystery set in rehab, luxury rehab, sort of peopled with celebrities, each with their own addiction issues. It's based around a character whose sister dies in that rehab, purportedly of suicide, but the sister, Meg, can't believe that's the case and decides to enter rehab herself. But Meg has her own addiction issues, so when she goes into the clinic, she has a double-fold problem to deal with. She has to solve her sister's murder, and she has to also overcome her own addiction at the same time.
Yes, which is Meg is not super excited about doing. She sort of wants to cheat the system.
Yeah, Meg, I mean, when Meg goes into the clinic, she's not really 100% sold on the idea that she even has so much of a problem, even though it's pretty obvious to the people in her life around her that she does.
Yes, absolutely. So in the acknowledgements, I want to talk about this right away because you discuss which I think is so wonderful, and we talked about this ahead of time, how great, how I think it's so admirable and a gift to all your readers that you talk about this. And you said, this is the first book I have ever written sober, which I think is really astounding. So, tell us about well, first of all, tell us about what it was like to write a book sober. Because of course we all believe that there's some magic that happens that you need some sort of extra, I've had the same thing about like taking antidepressants. Like if I take them, does that mean my magic goes away and I won't be able to write anything? So talk to us about what that was like to do that, to realize that you had to do this thing for your life, and then sort of the fear about writing.
Yeah, so as a fellow author, you'll understand, right? Of course, writing often feels like this completely magic process, and you don't know where it's coming from, and you don't know how you're getting these ideas sometimes. And I think also most writers, we go to really deep emotional places in our books, and if we're crime and thriller writers, we often go to really dark emotional places in our books, and the way that you deal with that as a writer is not always easy at all. And in my case, one of the ways that I dealt with that, or attempted to deal with that, was to use alcohol to kind of, I suppose, numb my reactions to it, perhaps deal with my reactions to it, and also to kind of in my head to allow me to go to those dark places which otherwise I couldn't get to. It felt kind of like an armor. But at the same time, I was using this substance that was killing me, right? And I had a problem with drinking too much alcohol. It was interfering and destroying with my life in so many ways. I felt like I couldn't stop. And at the same time, I also felt like I needed it to write the books. That was the sort of thing one of the things I hung on to, if you like. One of the reasons why it took me such a long time to quit.
Well, and I think, I can absolutely say that there are times, writing when I'm like, I pour myself a glass of wine just to be like, okay, it kind of softens all, like you said, the armor, it softens all these rules we set up about things we're not going to get, places we're not going to go. And it kind of lets you access them in a way that feels safer, right? Because you're like a little numb. And yet, of course, like it's really it's a crutch, right? It's not really what you need as a writer to get to those places, but it feels helpful in the moment, So I think that's incredibly brave. So of course, we're gonna, we talked about this a little ahead of time too. This was not your rehab experience, but because it is quite wild. But there's some really interesting aspects about addiction and the ways that people behave, addicts behave, and I thought that was really interesting to sort of see how well they lie, how sort of even to themselves, right? I mean, and it makes this incredible cast of characters. The sort of rehab romance stuff. I mean, I don't want to spoil any of the book, but there's so many interesting aspects. So when you were writing this book, sort of, you know, how did this, you obviously knew you were writing a thriller, so you're like, somebody has to die. And so how did it sort of come to you? What was the process of building this story for you?
So I personally went to rehab prior to writing this thriller to tackle my own alcoholism. Wasn't on my mind at that point to write a thriller set in rehab. In fact, I had this other book that I was kicking around that involved some emotional depth, let's say, that I felt like I wasn't getting to the heart of and was really struggling with. So during rehab, I felt I had this, or when I came out of rehab, actually, I should say, because it took me a good few months, I suddenly kind of felt I had this plot to kind of weld onto this book that wasn't working, and suddenly it all came together. And the process of rehab also kind of made me realize that the emotions and the kind of stuck trauma that I wasn't dealing with in the first place, I could kind of process in a different way for that book. But the process of getting the characters together after being in rehab is a crazy place. There's a lot of crazy things that happen in rehab, and as we talked about before time, I couldn't really talk about those things outside rehab because it would be unfair to the privacy of the people I was in rehab with. So being able to fictionalize those things just was like, someone had started the motor and it was just running, because there was so much material and there was so many different interesting characters. So I think I started with a few and there were also people in the rehab with me who were kind of known figures as well. So there was that aspect too to kind of draw upon. And it was a question of cutting down, to be honest. I would have liked to have more characters, but so I think there's 5, I think, for the main cast of suspects.
There's Tom, Jade, Sienna, plus you have the people who work at rehab, right? You've got Kara
people who work
and
at
Max.
Rehab. So we have a kind of aging supermodel. We have a young up and coming actress. We have a kind of established older sort of statesman-like actor. We have a kind of rock and roll sex god lead singer of a band. And then we have Meg, and I'm wondering if we have Sienna, of course, Jade is the actress, and then we have a singer in a girl band. That's right, who is plucked from there. So a kind of fun cast to kind of see, and then obviously having been in rehab, all of these things. There are things that are really I was told in rehab are very common to all rehabs, and one of them is romance, because once you kind of unpack and start to get vulnerable with your own feelings, you're suddenly in this sort of actually very happy place. Often you're in this almost loved up kind of place where you're like, everything suddenly seems possible, and there's no longer this poison in your system. And once you've got over that horrible physical aspect, you also feel very well disposed towards the other people with you. You really have great feelings of strong love towards the other people in your group. So unsurprisingly, that very often spills over into romance, and because that's not allowed in rehab, those romances have to be secret.
Well, and it makes total sense too, because you're in a safe place, right? All the sort of demons of your outside life, all the people who you've disappointed or hurt or whatever aren't there. So it's just really it's like summer camp for adults, right? A little bit,
It's so much like summer camp. That is actually a surprisingly good description. And quite a couple of people in rehab use that description too, because there is a really tricky aspect. You have to do the work, and there are physical aspects, but then you're also kind of at some point hanging with your buddies, you're talking, it's quite relaxed because you're not at work, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, and you feel fond of each other, but there are also arguments as well.
Of course. Yes, just like summer camp, exactly. Well,
just like summer camp, not everyone gets along.
Right, of course. And I love, one of the things, of course, Killer Women, I love to talk about sort of strong, female characters. So, Meg is this, she's, talk about her job, because I think her job is fascinating. And she has real resilience from a sort of difficult childhood, right? Raised by this mother. And so talk a little bit about her, because I think she's a phenomenal character to build this whole story around.
Thank you. So I loved writing Meg. Meg has basically made a career out of being able to spot poker players who are cheating the system. So she works for a casino in a professional capacity, and her job is to be kind of like the honey trap, go into poker games, play poker well or badly depending on what the situation needs, and she's an exceptionally good poker player because of her ability to read other people's reactions, which is a skill she's had to learn in childhood because of her experiences, and then catch people who are trying to defraud the system, trying to defraud the casino, or trying to loan shark, that kind of thing. So she has a legitimate job, but there's kind of a slightly shady edge because obviously she's sort of undercover. But whilst doing this job, she herself is addicted to prescription painkillers in order to help with an old injury, but really for her own psychological trauma of what she's been through in her childhood.
Yeah, and that we're not going to talk about the childhood thing, but I'm going to say that there's this, sort of eerie man with a hat, a fedora, and there's this, who has like playing card eyes, and there's this woman. So there's a lot of what the stuff she remembers from her childhood is really eerie and fabulous, and the way that and the solution to that at the end is so satisfying. So I just want to say, like, that was so fun to think, God, what is this thing? And then to have, the way well, that's all we're saying about that. So you have to read the book to understand. So tell us about the process of, writing sober. Like, what, were there moments as you started, as you did it for the first time? Because now, of course, you've done it again. You have another book, and you understand, of course, that it can be done, and you're, But what was it like in the beginning? Were there moments where you thought, did it make it harder to stay sober, the sort of writing process, because you had depended on it, or what was that like?
So I think I was lucky because I felt like I had this great plot to run with and all this material. So that got me started, but I was definitely plagued with self-doubt, and really up until the point, I think someone asked me this the other day, like up until the point that the book came out and readers liked it, I was still uncertain that I would ever really be able to make a career sober, because I really felt like this emotional aspect. But then interestingly, in terms of the character of Meg, some things that happened to me in rehab, I was able to sort of draw upon. So in terms of memory and things, I found, because I had drunk alcohol for my entire life, so I had never really been never actually been an adult sober. Like, since the age of 13, I had been regularly drinking to the point that I was always on some kind of roller coaster of alcohol or drugs or both. And when I started to come off the alcohol, I was getting, like Meg in the book, kind of shreds of memories. It was really strange, like I guess these things that had been suppressed for so many years, and it was like layers that you started to process some things, and then other things came up, and those things sort of felt unbelievable. Like, where did that come from? Is that even my memory? Is that even me thinking that? It felt really bizarre, and the only thing that sort of gave those memories a sort of shred of truth was the fact that they I remember my counsellor saying, but you've got so much better, that's where they're not just coming from nowhere, because you've kind of taken off this load of memories here. So a lot of that, I think, in the book was inspired, I suppose, rather than relying on the alcohol to access those darker memories or that trauma from my childhood, I was using, I suppose, the actual memories, I guess, and I guess I was able to process them in a better way. I think that is probably what's happening.
Well, that's what happens to Meg, right? I mean, all of a sudden and the memories, the way she sees those memories changes as, you know, as she's more sober. I mean, she, you know, it's, you know, she doesn't believe that they're real for, you know, a time. And you can understand that, of course, you know, we bury things, we all bury things, you know. And so when they start to come up, and it is kind of amazing, it seems like that's a real science, that as you were more and more sober, the bits of your past that you really didn't remember start to sort of surface again, so that you can process them, right? It's, I mean, the brain is amazing.
So. Yeah. So your body almost decides, okay, like, you know, you're ready for this now. You know, this layer has been lifted off, and now you've got, you know, now it's the bit below that to come. So yeah. I mean, it is, but it's a very unsettling thing to happen, and something that I really wanted to tap into in the book, because that experience of having these bizarre memories that you not only are not sure are real, but you kind of don't want to be real either. You know, there's the two things that go hand in hand. You'd really rather they weren't, you know, you'd really rather, like, oh, well, that's just something that popped into my head. So those two things fighting it out in your brain for supremacy, you know, do I want to get better, or do I want to just kind of pretend all this stuff didn't happen?
And if you're an active, you know, you obviously have an active imagination too, right? As writers, we're always thinking about sort of fantastical scenarios, and so there's probably some part of you that was like, oh, that has to be just something I've imagined, right? And then to find out it's not.
Yeah, well, yes. And also, I think, I mean, you must have this too. I think most writers would say, like, when we write, we feel like we're kind of a channel for something else, like, without being spiritual about it, but it feels very much like that. And I wouldn't, you almost like, well, look, I don't want to take credit for this stuff that I'm writing on the page, because a lot of it comes from kind of up there, and I don't know, I'm just kind of, you know, like channeling it and putting it out there. But it's not me, like, it's not my individual self, it's kind of something out there that I'm just putting down. So yeah, I think there's aspects of that as well, right, that we almost feel like we're opening ourselves up to, and maybe that's another aspect of using alcohol or any other substances, that we have to be, as writers, really open to kind of, you know, have these experiences, and then that's also quite hard as a human being,
right?
Quite tiring.
I mean, there's probably no real surprise that so many artists, right, including writers, do use alcohol and drugs, right? Because like you said, you're conduit, sort of, right? You're just, you feel like you're just attaching to something that is bigger. And it's hard, I think, in the day-to-day life of, you know, you're raising children, you're, you know, maybe working a day job, there's all this stuff that gets in the way of just being that sort of pure conduit for something that we feel like is coming from somewhere else. It gets so disrupted that you feel like, well, maybe this is the way I can plug in more easily. And that makes total sense to me. I mean, it's like, I mean, especially you got young children. When, you know, I remember with what young children, it's like, where can you find, it's not just the physical space and the time, but you need to have this sort of clear mind to do this job, right? You have to be able to sort of open yourself up and have nothing in your brain that interrupts between, you know, whatever you're trying to imagine and the page. And that's really hard.
Yeah, right, because if you've dropped off your kid to school and they haven't wanted to go in that day, that's, you know, going to interfere with, it's tricky. I mean, I nowadays I get up at 5 in the morning, and that's like my time, because that's before anyone can get to me, and then and then I have 2 hours with, you know, no one in my space, and I can kind of try and find that clean time. But it's a really hard thing to do, to get that time.
It's so hard. It is such a hard thing. Well, there's this quote I really like. I'm gonna read it. Where'd it go? No spoilers. I love this. Oh, I want to talk about Max too, because I'm curious about the kinds of people that end up working. Max is the, you know, the therapist inside the inside the rehab center, and you know, he obviously has his own trauma too. And I think that's an interesting thing. And even Kara, who's sort of the administrator of the clinic, it is interesting the kinds of people who end up working in rehab. So I want to talk about that. But this I thought was really interesting. Is that why I got addicted? Because I couldn't handle having feelings. Only you can answer that, he says. Addiction issues go hand in hand with sociopathy. Remember, antisocial personality disorder is a coping mechanism, a way of dealing with unbearable events in childhood. Many relentless traumas that forced you to adapt. You learned that love was unreliable, that adults were cruel and unpredictable, that healthy emotions only led to pain and suffering. As a child, you had no way of knowing how high the cost of losing your empathy was. So that's like, that's talking about how this patient basically pushes the empathy aside because it feels like a vulnerability that they can't afford, which I thought was so interesting.
Right. And I think people go in, and I should obviously say I don't position myself as an expert, this is simply my opinion, that people seem to go in two directions. So the one direction would be in terms of being neglected, let's say, as a child, or having had some difficult experiences, would be you dial your empathy up to kind of mean that you can meet the needs because you need it, because no one's giving you anything that you need. So in order to get like adult caregivers to give you what you need to be extra specially empathetically aware so that you can detect any subtle changes and hopefully get what you need to survive. So that would be like mechanism one. And then mechanism two would kind of be the opposite. So in an experience of unbearable emotional pain, a child might, and it's not, I'm not going to use the word choose because it's not a choice, but they might sort of almost cauterize their emotions as a coping mechanism, because it's just they just cannot deal with this unbearable emotional pain. So that would be kind of route two. So I suppose with that particular scene and that particular patient, I'm really interested in the idea of particularly antisocial personality disorders, in that we're often taught to look at them as monstrous and to look at them as villains, and generally those characters do represent the villains in fiction, and I just was interested in the way that actually those people are possibly the people who most need our sympathy and our support, because they've been down by everybody in the first place. And that's why
and I think there's a few, there are multiple characters in the story, in rehab, who in your story who handle it differently. And I think that's a beautiful thing too, because of course there's no one way to handle early childhood trauma. There's no one way to sort of protect our emotions or get what we need. And and what I love about what the Max, who's the therapist, says is that you don't have a choice, right? You don't understand that later on in life you're going to need this thing which you are cutting off, right? Your empathy, but because you're doing it, you have to. It's a survival technique.
Absolutely. And nor do you understand that if you've dialed up your empathy to the max, that's going to be incredibly overwhelming for you as an adult, and you might need to take steps to let yourself recover and so forth. And it's so individual. And one of the things they say in rehab, there's a number of phrases that people kind of say a lot in rehab, but one of them is that one person's trauma is another person's bad day. You just don't know which person is going to be affected by what thing, but generally it's being alone with something and unable to process something that you personally at the time couldn't handle.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a quote I read. I don't know if you caught it yesterday. I read on my Monday morning quote. I read the quote about how you have to go. I'm going to tell everyone to go listen to it. I do Monday morning quotes, and I read the quote about how police officers and politicians.
I caught that one. Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
Are oftentimes well, I guess there's sociopaths, right? I thought it was really interesting. People in power.
Sure. And I think for obvious reasons, as a society, we have a lot of negative connotations with that word, and certainly anyone watching who's had an encounter or a negative experience with a sociopath will feel very negatively towards anybody on that personality spectrum. But I think I was interested in how as a tribe we have different personalities across the spectrum that allows us to survive, as a tribe. And
Yep.
if you think about it, you know, we need someone who's going to be prepared to cut someone open on a medical gurney, because I couldn't do that. You know, I couldn't take a knife and put it into someone's body and drag it along, despite what I write about every day.
Right, right.
And similarly, I don't think I could be a police officer and see the worst of human nature every day and not have it take me down, because it would just be too difficult for me to process that. So we need people who are able to step aside to be logical about their emotions and do these very important roles for our society to function. It's not all bad.
No, I think that's a really valid point. And I want to agree with that, because I do think in the book, sociopathy doesn't necessarily mean that you're a psycho killer. It's not the same thing, right? It's just an ability to sort of shut down empathy in a way that makes you able to do something that most of us couldn't do, just as you said. So you're right. It does have a very negative connotation, but it's very necessary. You know, I would say politicians is a little more questionable, but no, they have to make a decision for a greater good, which sometimes means sacrificing some people for the, you know.
Again, yeah, I mean, I would not want to be the person pushing the button on the decisions, you know, to the big decisions. That would be too overwhelming for me to make, because I would be empathizing with, you know, the people I was sending out to fight or no,
it would not be a good job for me either. And I think that's why we get to be writers, right? We can imagine it both ways. So tell us, I want to hear about the books you write as CS Quinn, because I'm not familiar with those. So tell us a little bit about that.
So I started writing thrillers as historical thrillers as CS Quinn, and the reason for that was quite tactical, actually, because I had very low self-esteem about my writing in general, but I had got some experience. I'd done a degree in English, but I focused on history and gone on to do some more qualifications in that. So I felt that if I wrote historical books, it would be a better niche for me to sort of break into publishing, which certainly at the time, so this would have been I think at least 15 years ago in the UK, or actually 20 years ago, publishing in the UK feels very inaccessible to, I mean, I would come from, I would say, a lower middle class, upper working class sort of family, and publishing in the UK is very much peopled by people with excellent manners, many of whom went to boarding schools, and I just felt it was a language I didn't speak and I could never break in, so I needed this edge. So I wrote some thrillers, or I wrote a thriller called The Thief Taker, about a 17th century thief taker, or kind of a policeman at the time. I guess it would have been like a freelance find your thief kind of guy. I love that.
It
was a really fun one to write, actually, because obviously at the time there was no recognised police force, and he it's kind of a Dan Brown, Da Vinci Code sort of vibe. He's chasing a lost key through 17th century London, whilst kind of solving. It was so much fun to write, and the nice thing about writing historical thrillers is that you never really run low of ideas, because every scene has about 100 things that you need to check. You need to be like, okay, well, let me just check, did they actually use teaspoons, you know, and where would the teaspoons
right.
So then you get these great ideas, but obviously very, very much slows the process down. But then when you come to writing contemporary, it's kind of like training at altitude, because you can like go and like actually see videos from people, you know, like, or talk to people, you know, talk to actual alive people about their experiences. So both have their merits, actually, as a thing to do.
I love it. So how many CS Quinn books are there?
So there are 6 CS Quinn books. There are 4 in the Thief Taker series, and then I switched to a series which was so much fun called The Bastille Spy, which was about a like a female Scarlet Pimpernel. Although do you have the Scarlet Pimpernel in America? I didn't know if you did. It's famous. Essentially, in real history, during the French Revolution, there was a swashbuckling, purportedly male figure who rescued aristocrats from the guillotine. Yeah, and there was a really wildly popular book series about 100 years ago about this man's adventures and how he managed to sort of pull people from the brick. So I did a female version.
So fun.
Of that. Yeah, so it was so much fun, because it was like a spy, and you know, she was like undercover in France, like rescuing people.
I love that idea. Plus, I think there's something kind of fun. I always feel like if you go back far enough in history, the 1700s, not a lot of people know all the details of that. So you get a chance to sort of exploit some fun new details, and maybe a little more room. I mean, you can't use the cell phone, people would know that, but a little more room to kind of like fudge what the actual details are. Like now, when you write a book, if you get something wrong, everybody everybody who watches CSI knows you got it wrong, right? It's a little different.
Yeah, it's true. But you know what? Actually, I almost found the reverse is the case, because you would not believe how many people out there know exactly what 17th century London was like.
That is, yeah.
And they're going to tell you, if you got it wrong, they're going to tell you.
Well, fair.
So in a weird
totally
way,
fair.
I think a lot of people who read those books read them for the pleasure of sort of knowing, like, oh, we're sharing this. But I mean, luckily for me, I'm a massive history nerd, so I really enjoy kind of going through those details and like holding the original.
Yeah, you're not getting it wrong. It sounds like you're like,
I'm sure. I mean, like, how books go, of the million facts, and it probably is about that, isn't it? In a book, I will, unfortunately, because I'm a human being, probably sadly make an error, or maybe even two.
I mean, we're human. I would like to say we all, you have to rely a little bit on your readers and your editors and such. But yes, I can see that as well. The 17th century London history buffs are all over those CS Quinn books, I can imagine. So
they sure are, yeah.
Okay, so tell us, what is next for Cate Quinn or CS Quinn? What are you working on right now, or what did you just finish? I know you finished a book.
I have just finished one. I think I am going to do another CS Quinn one, because I just feel like I've got a bit more time now. So, but the next one is a Cate Quinn book, and it is the sort of working title is The Bridesmaid, but that could change. But it is about a Paris Hilton type character about to get married, and she has a stalker who is killing her bridesmaids. And the stalker is possibly someone very close to her. We don't know. So you kind of follow her through that journey. And then I'm also doing a CS Quinn, because for that book, as perverse as that might sound, I went and stayed with quite a few nuns, which will make sense if you read the book.
Okay.
The music makes sense. And I had a great time, actually. It was incredibly interesting. But one of the other things I did was I thought I've got bubbling away the idea for a CS Quinn book to do with not murder in a convent, because the nuns would never forgive me. In fact, I think they made that quite clear. They literally said, like, please don't murder anyone in a convent.
Yes, exactly.
Fair. So outside of a convent, there will and I think it will be and that will be in a more CS Quinn style, so more of a treasure hunty thriller kind of vibe,
and historical
well, I think I might do more of a modern day linked with historical scenes. I think just to be a bit more accessible.
Totally. Oh, that sounds wonderful. You are a busy lady.
Yeah, well, as are you, right? I mean, we always have things going on as writers. When do we start?
Yes. Okay, tell our listeners where to find you. I know what are you, Cate Quinn writer? Tell us on Instagram. Cate Quinn.
I should know this, shouldn't I? I believe I am Cate Quinn author on Instagram. I will just confirm this. Yeah, Cate Quinn author. And then the same, because I think I started to put Cate CS Quinn, and no one could find me. It was a dreadful business. I finally got my head around social media now.
I know, it's very confusing.
It's very confusing, and to my shame, when Black Widows came out, I wasn't even really on Instagram, and I had an account, and when I looked back, I had all this amazing reviews and things, and I had to go back and thank everybody, but I felt so bad that they had. So anyway, I'm on Instagram now.
Good.
Still can't figure out Twitter, but I am on the same handle on Twitter, Cate Quinn.
I can't do Twitter. I just can't. I don't know.
I work it out.
People love it. That's how I feel too. And TikTok. How about TikTok? I'm ancient. There's no way. There's no TikToks for me.
There's no TikToks. I think my publishers are on it with TikTok. I am, I might spend a day trying to get my head around TikTok.
There you go.
I have a young niece who might be able to, laugh at me.
Oh yeah. You're way younger. You can do it. I'm officially done with that. Well, I loved the clinic. It was so fun to chat with you. Thank you so much for being so
You
candid and
too.
about your experiences. And I think this is, as I said earlier, this is the gift I feel like, we women give to one another, to say this is the hard stuff we go through and come out on the other side, better and stronger. So thank you so much. This is not a sobriety handbook, by the way. This is a totally fun page turner. I of course love to dig into all the stuff behind that. I make my little tabs always on the pages that I love the most, but the clinic is super fun. Cate, thank you so much for joining us today. It was so fun to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Everyone, this is Killer Women with Cate Quinn, and we will see you next time. Bye.